Okay, welcome back to our Drsign Slayer's Academy, Chapter 6. Wiglaf and Angus flattened themselves against a curve in the castle wall. They watched Mordred walk quickly toward the rear of the castle. "Must be checking on his trash pit," said Angus. Wiglaf kept his eyes on the moat. He saw a small head pop out of the water. "Worm!" The pipling had an eel hanging out of his mouth. He threw back his head and gulped it down. Then he flapped his wings, splashing like crazy. "Who goes there?" Mordred cried. His violet eyes looked up and down the moat, but the pipling had dived back under the water. Only when Mordred walked off did Wiglaf start to breathe again. "There's Worm!" cried Angus. "Wiggy, we have to save him!" He grabbed Wiglaf by the arm, and before Wiglaf knew what was happening, splash! He and Angus hit the water. Brr! It was freezing. Wiglaf surfaced. He swiped the moat weeds from his head with one hand while he paddled with the other. "I see him!" cried Angus. "Come on!" Wiglaf swam after Angus toward Worm. Only the pipling's skinny little neck and head stuck out of the water. He saw the boys coming and burbled happily, "Rum!" Angus reached out for the pipling. Worm's eyes lit up and he dove under the water again. Wiglaf groaned. "He thinks it's a game, Angus." "Ahoy, lads!" came a voice. Wiglaf looked up. On the bank of the moat stood Coach Plunkett, the DSA gym teacher. "Practicing your swimming strokes, I see," Coach said. "Jolly good. Glad to see you getting some exercise, Angus. And Wiglaf, more reach with those arms." He began demonstrating the crawl stroke. The boys swam using their best form. "Better!" shouted Coach. "Much better!" Just then Worm popped up again. Coach had one arm up over his head. He didn't see the pipling. "Like this, lads," called Coach Plunkett. "Do this every day and you'll grow up to be manly men like me." "Worm! Worm!" Worm called to Wiglaf and Angus. Coach was busy demonstrating the frog kick on land. "With lads like you on the swim team, we'll beat Dragon Stabbers Prep, or my name isn't Wendell Plunkett," Coach cried. "Well, I must go and meet my sweet Belchina for lunch. Farewell." He waved and strode off toward the cottage on Huntsman's Path, where he lived with his bride. As Wiglaf waved back, Worm sprang up right in front of him. He was slurping down another eel. Wiglaf threw his arms around him, but the slippery pipling slid out of his grasp. "Come, Worm," Wiglaf coaxed. "Come to Mommy." Mommy," said Worm. He swam to Wiglaf, but as Wiglaf reached for him, he darted away. He did this again and again. Meanwhile, Angus swam quietly up behind the pipling and began treading water. "Worm, look at me," Angus ordered. Worm turned around. Angus didn't reach for him. He stuck out his chin. He flared his nostrils. He did not blink as he stared at the little dragon. Worm cocked his head as if trying to decide whether Angus meant business. Angus kept his gaze on Worm as he slowly brought his arm out of the water. He had an eel in his hand. He held it to the pipling's nose. Worm looked at it cross-eyed, but didn't snap it up. Slowly Angus drew the eel treat toward his own eyes, and there it was, eye contact. "You may have the treat now, Worm," said Angus. He gave it to the pipling, all the while staring into his yellow and red eyeballs. "But always remember, I am in charge." "Sir," trilled Worm. Angus grinned. "Did you hear that, Wiggy? He called me sir." "I heard it," Wiglaf smiled. "Now tell him to get out of the moat, Angus, or we'll catch our death of cold." After that, Worm followed Angus back to the hen house like a little duckling. The boys' uniforms were soaking wet and smelly from the moat, so they cut scrub-a-thon and hid out in the hen house that afternoon. They kept busy with training Worm. Even Daisy had returned from the library with a big stack of books, was impressed with how fast the Pipling learned. That very afternoon, Angus taught Worm sit and down. Sir Sit-stay-hill recommended training with both hand signals and English commands. Over the next few days, they worked with the Pipling between scrub-a-thon chores until he had nailed stay, come, leave it, give a paw, speak, and no speak. He had loved playing games, so Wiglaf taught him fetch and hide and seek. But the Pipling's favorite game was one he made up himself. Wiglaf called it Make Me Laugh. Worm played it by making faces and doing silly things until the boys cracked up. All this time Worm was growing. Now the top of his little crested head came up to Wiglaf's shoulder. That same night, just before torches out, Erica came over and sat on Wiglaf's cot. He had hardly seen her lately. She was either out on dawn patrol or doing extra credit scrubbing. "Dawn patrol is over," Erica said. "Bragwort and I finished carting Frypot's garbage heap to the trash pit." "That whole mountain of garbage is gone?" said Angus. Erica nodded proudly. "And how is it that something doing? That something I don't know anything about?" "He's fine," said Wiglaf. "Angus is very good at training the something." Angus grinned. "If you can make eye contact, you can get a dragon to do anything you want." "Eye contact?" Erica said. "I'll remember that." Then she looked puzzled. "Wiggy, what happened to your blanket?" "Something needed a bed," said Wiglaf. Erica ran off. When she returned, she was carrying a nice thick blanket and a pillow. "You know me," she said. "I have extra everything." She plopped them down on Wiglaf's cot. That night Wiglaf felt warm and happy. He had never slept on a pillow before, and he felt as if he were floating on a cloud. He closed his eyes and fell asleep, smiling. Soon Wiglaf was dreaming about Worm, calling, "Mommy! Mommy!" Wiglaf rolled over in his sleep. He found himself pressed up against something hard and lumpy. Wiglaf opened one eye. A pair of yellow eyes glared back at him. "Mommy!" Worm cooed as he snuggled close to Wiglaf. He licked his face. Wiglaf sat up. This was no dream. This was real. Worm had crawled into bed with him. Leaving Worm in the hen house wasn't working. He couldn't stay in the dorm. He might be discovered. Was there anywhere outside? No. What if Worm decided to plunge into the moat again? Who knew what he'd think to do next? "Worm!" groaned Wiglaf. "What am I going to do with you?" "Mummy!" Worm burbled sleepily. Wiglaf couldn't help smiling. He closed his eyes and pulled Erica's thick, warm blanket up to his chin. He'd figure it out tomorrow. And stay tuned for Chapter 7.